There are just some really bad Magic the Gathering cards out there, to the point where the best use for them is to burn them. So today, we are going to break these unusable cards. Scorching Spear has some uses, but there are just some way better cards out there. Scorching Spear makes you pay 1 mana to cast it so it can do 1 damage to target creature or player. That may sound decent to some, but take in consideration cards like Lightning Bolt. It costs the same amount of mana to deal 3 damage instead of 1, so how can we improve on this card? Your Axonal Deepest Might is a 4/4 and says, whenever a red source of yours deals damage lower than his power, then it deals damage equal to his power instead. So in a way, this has the possibility of being better than Lightning Bolt. Primordial Ooze is just a spiteful old blob. It has to attack each turn if able. During your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then pay X, where X is equal to the number of counters on Primordial Ooze. And if you can't do that, tap it, and it deals X damage to you. Using Zedra the Great-Hearted as our commander, we can pay a measly fine of 3 mana to generously gift our opponents with this wonderful blob of a card. But what if we don't want our opponents to take control of our babies? What if we love our children? I mean cards. Regardless of if they're trying to kill us or not. We can use Auntie Blight, Bad Influence, who then tells our cards they're doing a fantastic job dealing damage to us. Because that Auntie, she buffs up like crazy. Bog Hoodlums costs 6 mana and is a 4/1. It cannot block, and whenever it comes into play, you must clash with an opponent. If you win, put a +1/+1 on Bog Hoodlums. This card has almost no uses. It is very expensive for the little you get in return. There are just a few cards that you can use to make this card work better. Better than it can in any other deck. Brinelin the Moonkraken makes your opponents return any non-land permanent to their hand as long as you've played a spell that costs 6 mana or more. That's about it. I did find a couple uses for it. One person said that it makes a great bookmark, and you can put it in your bike spose so it makes a cool sound whenever you write it. Another person said it makes a great coaster, or you can get 6 of them and turn it into a wheat box. And honestly, I couldn't agree more with these two. But my mission isn't to find the most obvious uses for Bog Hoodlums. My mission is to make it better. Wood Elemental is very notorious for being the worst card in Magic the Gathering. This card is so bad and so popular, people are willing to pay over $20 just to have it in their collection. Now you may be asking, if this card is so bad, how can you make it good? I can't make it good. I can make it fantastic. This is one of the most saltiest combos I have ever seen. First, you want to play Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, to turn all lands into forests in addition to their other types. Then you want to play Urgborg, Tomb of Yogg-Sothoth, to turn them now all into swamps. Play Kermis Bell to turn all swamps into 1/1 creatures. They are still lands. At this point, your opponent probably thinks you're crazy, but they have not seen the half of it. Now play Reigns of Power to switch yours and your opponent's creatures until end of turn. Now at this point, you want to play Wood Elemental to then sacrifice all of your opponent's untapped lands that they so generously and definitely were not forced to give to you. Your next turn will be comprised of stomping your opponent out of existence. Bargain is just weirdly expensive. For 3 mana you gain 7 life and give your opponent an advantage by letting him draw a card. There are just better cards out there. But how can we use our opponent's advantage to their disadvantage? We first need to make an infinite mana combo. Preferably something cheap. So let's cast Rings of Brightheart, which allows us to pay 2 mana to copy an ability and choose new targets for the copy, but as long as it's not a mana ability. Then we will play Basalt Monolith, which allows us to tap it for 3 mana and untap it for 3 mana. Now we tap Basalt Monolith to gain 3 mana. Then we pay 3 mana to untap it, and then pay 2 mana to copy that untap ability. We will then tap it for 3 mana, and then untap it with the copy we just created, and keep doing this over and over and over until we have infinite mana. Currently, you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with Bargain? It has everything to do with Bargain. Now hear me out. Now that we have infinite mana, we want to play Bargain, and then play Storm King's Thunder to copy Bargain infinite times. So now, not only do you have infinite mana, but you have infinite life, and you milled your opponent's deck infinite times. They lose the game, you win, and they can never tell you Bargain is such a terrible card ever again. Sorrow's Path is a land that allows you to pay 2 mana to exchange 2 of your opponent's blocking creatures. But it does 2 damage to you and 2 damage to each creature you control whenever it's tapped. A redditor told me I'd wash it in gasoline and dry it with a match. That seems like a sound idea if we weren't trying to break it. Here's how we're going to make this expensive sheet of toilet paper useful. Anyways, we're gonna play Stuffy Doll, who has Indestructible, and whenever it enters the battlefield, choose a player. Whenever damage is dealt to it, we can deal damage to the selected player. In this case, we will choose ourselves. We're bringing dear old Auntie Blight back out. She receives a +1/+1 bonus from Stuffy Doll, who taps and deals 1 damage to us, triggering Auntie Blight's ability. This also keeps Sorrow's Path from automatically killing Auntie Blight. Now, we just want to keep dealing damage to ourselves, damage to our creatures, and buffing Auntie Blight to the max. Once we have enough of those +1/+1 counters on Auntie Blight, we will then remove them all to deal a 1-hit KO to our opponent. Remember, for this to work, you need to have at least a little more health than your opponent does. Scornful Egotist costs 8 mana just for a 1/1 creature. Thankfully, it does have Morph for 1 mana. This is one of the cards I really couldn't find much use for. The best thing I found was Kadena Slinking Sorcerer as our commander, who then gives any cards that are played face down 3 or less mana to come out. Basically, all your creatures will be coming out for free and you only have to pay the morphing cost to use it. But why even flip Scornful Egotist if you could just use it as a 2/2 instead? I was recently asked, is this even a real card? Yes, this is a very much real card and it's best to take this seriously. Leviathan, very much like Wood Elemental, is notorious for being the worst blue spell in Magic the Gathering. Leviathan is a 10/10 with Trample, and it costs 9 mana to come out. Leviathan comes into play tapped and does not untap during your untap step. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can sacrifice 2 islands. If you do, you may untap Leviathan. Leviathan cannot attack unless you have sacrificed 2 islands. That sounds really bad. Like one of the worst cards I have ever heard. But we may be able to save it yet. We could always use it as a blocker, but the best way that we could use this card is to just throw it at our opponents. We can use Fling and copy it with Storm King's Thunder infinitely using the previous mana loop combo we did with Bargain. We could just throw our whole body weight at our opponent before they even know what's happening or even why we decided to play Leviathan in the first place. These were some of the ways I could find uses for almost useless cards. As you can see, most of these cards don't even work unless it's in incredibly specific situations. And yes, most of these you could find better cards for, but that is just not the point here. Speaking of useless, I have discovered the most useless items in Dungeons & Dragons, like a ring that only turns 1 finger invisible. Or over here, we made a $1 Magic the Gathering deck.